Welcome everyone. It's so great to have you here with us tonight. I'm Becky Jones and I'm representing Straw Dog Writers Guild tonight. And this event is co-hosted with by Straw Dog Writers and by Forbes Library. This event grew out of the 2016 elections when it became clear that we needed to hear and encourage voices of resistance in the world, and that need obviously continues now. Voices for Resistance provides a platform for writers who challenge the dominant paradigms on such subjects as gender, race, class, ability, culture, neurodiversity, and what it means to be safe in the world. And also it's a way for us to hear those voices and to be encouraged to become a more mutually supportive community and hopefully world. So we're pleased to have 6 authors with us tonight. Sejal Shah was supposed to be with us and she could not be with us because of a death in her family. And Nima Avashia, who is our MC, is going to be the 6th reader. So our readers for this evening are Nima Avashia, Diane Gilliam, Oghenechovwe Donald Ekpeki, Lisbeth White, Kelly Link, and James Tate Hill in that order. And our MC, as I said, is Nima. She's continuing a tradition that we started last year, which is to have a previous year's reader be the MC for this year. So this year's readers, just be forewarned a little bit. We will post bios and links to books in the chat as the readers come forward, and we'll also put some information about Sejal Shah's books. If you want to make a comment to a writer, please feel free to write in the chat. It's really helpful if you put the person's name in it so that when after they're reading, they go back and look and know that it's actually meant for them. And then also if you have questions for later, please feel free to put those in the chat as well. So I'm going to just invite Molly Moss to step in with me for a minute and just say thank you, Molly, for your co-hosting.
Yeah, I'm so thrilled to be doing this again with Straw Dogs. I don't know if we've been doing it since 2016, the first year, or if we joined a little bit later, but it's one of my favorite events of the year. And we've been working more and more with Straw Dogs on a number of things, including their monthly readings at the library now. And I will put in the chat our other events if you are local, or we are doing other things online as well. So even if you're not local, you can find out more about what's happening at the library.
So thanks, Molly. And yeah, and we actually didn't do one for the first year. It took us a while to get the Voices for Resistance up and running. So, and I think we skipped a year during the pandemic. So I think this is our 5th. So I want to sort of turn now to introducing Nima. So I'll invite you to come up into the spotlight with me. So I had the pleasure of hearing Nima last year, and I listened again to the recording from last year, which is available on the Straw Dog website for anybody else that wants to hear it. And she read a piece on the history of guns, and I was again moved by the incredible detail that conveys place and history and culture and a sense of belonging or not belonging. And that essay brought me to tears again, as it did the first time I heard it. So thank you, Nima, for leading this event for us tonight and for stepping in to take Sejal Shah's place. Please take it away.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me, everybody. As Becky said, my name is Nima Avashia. I'm really honored to be back with you emceeing tonight, and I'm going to read you one essay from my collection, Another Appalachia, Coming Up Queer and Indian in a Mountain Place, which came out about a year ago. This essay is called Our Armor, and it's in 3 parts. 1. My mother's morning preparations always took the same form. She emerged from the bathroom after her shower, the air around her perfumed by a heady mix of talcum powder and baby oil. Dressed in a blouse and petticoat, the softness of her belly just spilled over the tightness of the drawstring waist. From my perch on her bed, I watched her get ready for the day ahead, following her movements through her reflection in the mirror. First, she mercilessly attacked the knots in her waist-length hair with a plastic comb, then used her slender fingers to divide the hair into 3 equal sections, which she braided without looking, only pulling the braid over her shoulder when her arms could no longer reach far enough down her back. Next, she wrapped a sari around her body, pleating and draping 6 yards of silk with a tailor's precision. Last, she put on her ornaments, thin gold bangles that jangled solidly on her wrists, small gold hoop earrings, a black and gold pearl Mangalsutra around her neck, a black mascaro chanlo on her forehead. Ensemble complete, she stepped out of our home and into the wilds of small town West Virginia. In such a foreign context, she opted to own her foreignness rather than hide it. On her walks to school, at her job as an accountant, during her service on the board of the local library, as a troop leader for the Girl Scouts. The chanlo was the marker of marriage for Indian women of my mother's generation. It has many names. Tilak and bindi are the 2 most common, but in Gujarati, chanlo is the preferred one. Placed between the eyebrows at the side of the 6th chakra, it's said to represent the 3rd eye and the notion of hidden wisdom. Indian women in India mark their heads with vermilion powder or with tiny stickers in a multitude of shapes, colors, and designs to match each of their saris. For my mother, none of these options were available. There was no Indian grocery store where she could purchase vermilion or sheets of chanlo stickers. So she did what immigrants in America always do to survive. She modified, bought mascara from Rite Aid, perfected the art of drawing a tiny black circle on her forehead with a fuzzy, curvy brush, never left the house unmarked. By midday, the chanlo would begin to crust, crumbled bits of mascara landing on her cheeks or chin. My mother carried her mascara in her purse. Even at the height of tax season, with its 16-hour workdays, at first sign of crumble, she would take a moment to go to the bathroom, wash off the remains of the mascara, and reapply, determined to keep her 3rd eye intact. I used to think my mother was an embarrassment. Her silky clothes and glittering jewelry contrasted so sharply with the hairspray stiffened perms and acid-washed mom jeans of my classmates' mothers. Our brownness in a white world already marked us as other. Why did she need to heighten the distinction? In Jersey City around this time, white supremacists, self-proclaimed dot busters, chased Indian women down the street, beat them when they caught them. The way to stay safe, I thought, was to blend in. And my dazzling mother, dazzling in both her style and her personality, never blended into the bland linoleum and polyester environs of 1980s West Virginia. I shushed my mother when she spoke to me in Gujarati in public, its pitch and tone so different than that of English. Speak English, I'd demand, refusing to acknowledge her if she wouldn't. Children can be so cruel, the saying goes, and I was living proof. I curse my cruelty now when I can't find the vocabulary in Gujarati to communicate complex ideas. Or when I wear a sari and my mother's stinging response is that I look weird because you can't reconcile my short hair with traditional clothing. I want to believe that my message of assimilation, pushed so strongly on my mother, was born of my need for safety, both my own and my mother's. But the safety came at tremendous cost. My mother's saris now gather dust in her closet, only worn on the most special of occasions. 2. Pamela Circle was never a flag-waving neighborhood in the 80s and 90s. My neighbors' yards did not boast flagpoles. Their porches lacked flag holders. Flapping American flags were flown in schoolyards, not front yards. Flapping Confederate flags were flown in yards in other neighborhoods. I learned very early not to trespass through. But on my street, the main morning sounds were those of birds chirping and basketballs pounding on pavement, not red, white, and blue bunting flapping in the breeze. Until late September in 2001, that is, when my parents took a trip to Portland, Oregon. They sat in their rental car at a stoplight downtown when a group of white men approached, banged on the hood, and rocked the car. The men screamed epithets and curses and the favorite phrase of white supremacists everywhere hurled at those of us who are not white. Go back to where you came from. The light changed. My father slammed the gas pedal, charging forward, unconcerned about whether he ran over anyone's feet in the process. Later that same fall, on a Greyhound bus in Logan, West Virginia, less than an hour from our home, white passengers tackled an older Indian man and pinned him to the floor. They viewed his frequent trips to the bathroom as suspicious instead of being the result of a failing prostate. They only removed their knees from his back when the police arrived to take him off the bus. For 25 years, precisely the same amount of time he had spent living in India, my father had worked to make West Virginia feel like home. And then any glimmer of insider status he'd gained in 2.5 decades evaporated between the hours of 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. on September 11th of 2001. After their trip, my father promptly went to Castro Hardware and purchased a massive American flag decal emblazoned with the saying, "Proud to be an American." He taped it to our glass front door, leaving sticky residue marks of many crooked attempts before he felt satisfied that it was straight. Another flag got taped into the back windshield of his blue Toyota van. A third got placed in a holder on the porch. 640 miles away in Madison, Wisconsin, I compulsively went across the street every afternoon to check on the Punjabi Sikhs who ran the gas station, using them as a proxy for my parents. 4 days after 9/11, Balbir Singh Sodhi, a Punjabi man my father's age, was murdered at his gas station in Arizona by Frank Silva Roque, a white supremacist who shouted, "I'm a patriot and I stand for America all the way," when arrested. Sodhi's brown skin and turban were all it took for him to be interpreted as a threat, as a terrorist, as someone whose murder was justified. I did not believe my father's flags would keep him safe, but I could not ask him to take them down. I struggled with his assertion of patriotism towards a country that had only shown me ambivalence regarding my existence, and simultaneously lived in fear of what might happen to my parents if the Confederate flag wavers of other neighborhoods found their way to our street, so profoundly apolitical and welcoming up to this point. My parents' professional lives as doctors and accountants may have buffered them from the worst of West Virginia's racism before 9/11. I, on the other hand, felt its effects from the age of 6, when a chubby, rat-tailed kindergartner approached me in the schoolyard, slapped me across the face, and hit me with the ugliest of racial slurs, illustrating that in West Virginia, there were only 2 categories that seemed to matter when it came to race: white and not white. And again, when fans of the opposing middle school basketball team screamed "Mr. Miyagi" and "Speedy Gonzalez" and "Where's your papoose" each time I walked onto the court, showering me with trash and epithets, then pissed on our school bus at the end of the game. And again, when a high school classmate with his heavily gelled mullet and black Metallica t-shirt pulled over his enormous belly called me camel jockey every day during shop class, and our teacher pretended not to hear him. Until 9/11, my parents did not question their belonging in America. America provided them work, wealth, the opportunity to live a kind of life impossible to imagine in India, and to bring family members into its slowly growing middle class. Meanwhile, I, exposed daily to the ugliest manifestations of American ignorance, received continual reminders that I did not belong. If the flag could protect my parents from this venom, and from the thick, incapacitating doubt that such venom shuttles to the brain, I would not ask them to take it down. 3. I can't remember when I began to openly flaunt my West Virginia roots, to wear t-shirts emblazoned with images of West Virginia and the lyrics to Country Roads, to proudly share every historical and cultural factoid I had collected during my time living in the state and have continued to collect after leaving. I can, however, remember the first time a white man in West Virginia told me, "Go back to where you came from," at a gas station in Sissonville in the fall of 1995, in between chugs from his 40. And the second time on the side of the road in Nashville, Tennessee in the summer of 1996, screamed out a car window. And the third time at Ogilvie Park in Wheeling in the fall of 1998, when a leering cowboy held up his hand and said, "How?" mocking a Lakota greeting. He asked me what tribe I was from, and when I responded that I was not that kind of Indian, proceeded to spit hate in my face. And again in the summer of 2019, when the newspaper headlines announced that our white male president scolded a group of Black and brown congresswomen using that very same phrase. I hate the way my body responds to acts of racism. Where others are able to stay calm and unaffected or angrily fight back, I simply disintegrate. My eyes blur, my temples pound, and I catalog counter-arguments in my mind. But my dry mouth, the fear squeezing my chest cavity, prevents me from saying a word. I want in those moments to assert my Americanness, my West Virginianness, to pull out the birth certificate detailing my birth at Thomas Hospital in Charleston, West Virginia, in the heart of the Kanawha Valley. That muddy river valley, those green mountains, those smoking chemical stacks, they are where I come from. So much so that I'm writing this essay in a room in my house entirely dedicated to the state of West Virginia. The walls are decorated with a wedding ring quilt, a painting of the New River Gorge, and a map of West Virginia that dates back to the late 1880s. My light source is a lamp from the Blanco glassblowing factory in Milton, 20 minutes from where I grew up. I want to show my doubters that I'm an expansive encyclopedia of knowledge about West Virginia, most of which I learned in my 8th grade West Virginia Studies course, or have memorized from the actual West Virginia Encyclopedia, my favorite coffee table book. Do you know your state bird and state animal? Mine are the cardinal and the black bear. Can you name every celebrity to come out of your home state? Chuck Yeager was born in Myra long before he flew his plane so fast that he broke the sound barrier. Jerry West was from Cheyenne, R. Zeke from Cabin Creek, years before he made the NBA All-Star team 14 times. Walter D. Myers was born in Martinsburg before he became a phenomenal writer for young adults. Henry Louis Gates Jr. and his brilliant brain spent their formative years in Kaiser. Randy Moss first played football in the backyards of Rand, and Lou Holtz did the same in Fallsby. And Jennifer Garner wasn't born in West Virginia, but she lived there for most of her childhood before kicking ass on ABC's Alias, where her code name on missions was often Mountaineer. There are Americans whose ancestors have lived in the same state for centuries who don't always know as much about their states as I do. This is a fact. And it's also a fact that knowledge is not the marker of belonging in America that I want it to be. When congresswomen born and raised in the United States are being told to return to the places they came from on the basis of their skin color and their last names, I find myself questioning when or whether our country will ever see people who look like me, my parents, or my child as American. In the absence of a body that knows how to effectively respond to racism, I wrap myself in my home shirt with the state of West Virginia replacing the O, in much the same way that my mother wrapped herself in 6 yards of silken sari, or my father wrapped himself in the US flag, as though fabric can protect us, as though fabric will make it impossible for angry men to see through the cloth to the skin below. Thank you.
Thank you, Nima. It's I love the way you just wrap that up with wrapping oneself in the T-shirt the way your mother did with the sari and your father with the flag. So thank you for that visceral reading. And now I turn it over to you for real.
Thanks, Becky. All right, I'm so excited for our first reader, who is Diane Gilliam, a wonderful poet. She's going to take it away. Oh, Diane, I think you're on mute.
Yeah. Okay. With my voice this time. I'm going to read 2 poems. The first one is from Kettle Bottom, which is a collection of poems in the voices of people who were living in West Virginia at the time of 1920 West Virginia mine wars. So this poem is in the voice of Edith Mae Chapman, who is 9, and we are down in Mingo County in 1920. Dear Diary, my teacher, Miss Terry, has given me this little book. For a girl, she says, has got lots of feelings she needs to get out, and maybe she don't want to tell them to the whole world. That is what a diary is for. So I will tell you, dear diary, all my secrets, beginning with Emily Lawson. Every few months, church ladies in Cincinnati sends us at Winco a mission box. Mostly, it is a big lot of nothing can't nobody use. But last time, the women began to praise Jesus and clap, for it was all coats. They lit into the box and began to parcel them out, holding them up by the shoulders, seeing what fit who. I just sat quiet, but I seen a blue coat in the pile, so pretty, blue and soft looking, with a black velvet collar, jet buttons like little barrels and shiny black loops. I didn't say nothing, for it is wrong to covet. But Granny Chapman, she seen me looking, and she said to Mama, well, I do believe that little blue coat looks made for Edith Mae. I knowed Mama might frown, for she don't believe in taking the finest things. The first, she says, shall be last. Granny Chapman looked at her hard, though, till Mama smiled and said, why, yes, Edith Mae, come on and let us see. All the neighbor women said, ain't she pretty? And look at them blue eyes, till I felt like a queen. When me and Mama went on home, and Daddy seen me in my coat, he commenced to stomping around, for he is hateful of them mission boxes. But Mama caught his eye and shook her head no at him. He just said, well, and grunted some and sat back down and looked at me. Edith Mae, he said finally, you are the apple of my eye. I ran over and climbed up on his lap, which I have not for a long time, as I am 9, and hugged his neck and told him, "Daddy, you are the huckleberry of my heart." Later, when Mom and Daddy was abed, I will tell you, dear diary, I snuck my coat off of the peg to sleep in. It crackled under my back from a letter I found stuck up under the lining, which says this: "Dear Mountain Girl, my mother has told me how in the coal camps of West Virginia, there are girls who do not have dancing lessons or a new coat every year or the benefit of scripture or even supper every day. Mother says I must remember that the last shall be first. So I have kept last year's coat and send you the new blue coat Grandmother Lawson sent me from Boston. I hope it will keep you warm and make you feel not so poor. Very truly yours, Emily Lawson." I don't aim ever to tell, for it is good when Daddy don't stomp and Mama smiles and says, "Edith May, you plenty warm in that pretty coat?" And I say, "Yes, Mama, warm as pie," which is true and not a lie, for it is only my heart that is cold. And the other poem I want to read you is from Dreadful Wind and Rain. It's a Where I'm From poem. The first Where I'm From, if some of you probably know quite a lot about that already, but the first Where I'm From poem was written by my dear friend and a Kentucky wonder of a poet, Georgella Lyon. And it is a poem that has opened a space for many different kinds of voices all over the world. And hard to be an Appalachian poet and not write a Where I'm From poem. So this is mine. And my mother's name is Hope. So the Hopi in the first line is not the Indian tribe, it's my mom's name. It's what they call her in the family. Where I'm From, after Georgella Lyon. I am from Hopi and Odell, from Rumi's anteroom of souls, some kind of late night wedding chapel where, as my parents married, my soul stood up at the sweetness of their faces. Yes, I said, I will. I do. I am from Sweet Jesus, glowing honey brown on the back wall of the church, and my mother's cousin Darlene leading song service up front, her arms waving like a drum major's. I'm redeemed, by love divine, by love divine. Glory, glory, Christ is mine, Christ is mine. The men singing the echo part, and the sun pouring in all wild. I am from the uncool table of girls who polished rocks, made up songs in little notebooks, and spoke in the language of the once and future king. From learning to say grandma instead of mama, and to not tell about the poke Daddy pulled from the side of the road for supper. I am from the time I asked Laura Grinstead of the smooth hair and matching clothes a question about English class, and Nancy Grimm informed me, were you talking to her? I'm from watching my sister-in-law to learn what to wear. I am from 10 years of graduate school and always only one right answer for every 25 students. From the full professor who said to me as I sat in his office 8 months gone, shame, I was having babies instead of books. I am from my girls who birthed me every day into this world. I am from heart attacks and strokes, from Daddy playing his guitar and whispering hope to Uncle Ted at 3 a.m. in the Morrow County Hospital, and from my cousin Debbie, who punched out the nurse that tried to stop him. I am from the man who took off his hat when I cried in the elevator in St. Joe's, and from the woman who prayed with my mother in the bathroom at Walmart the 4th day after chemo. I am from the same waiting room as you, the one where God said, "Who will go to this world I made only out of things that die, and find out for us how much sweetness that adds?" And we, all of us, raised our hands.
Thank you, Diane, for those beautiful poems. There's so many images that just, I feel like have stayed with me. The blue coat, the huckleberry of my heart, sun pouring in all wild, and cousin Debbie punching out the nurse. I feel like I've got all of those staying with me. And I really loved how there's so much emotional resonance packed into both of those pieces. We're going to go to our next reader now, which is Oghenechovwe Donald Ekpeki. It's going to be reading for us next.
Okay. I'll be reading from my unpublished short story. It's titled The Name Equations. Can you hear me? Okay. You stumble through the cold, every breath hard, through your lungs beaten by a lifetime of chronic sinusitis and left scarred by pneumonia and tuberculosis. And you've never gotten used to the winter in New York, not in 3 years as an MFA student, not after dropping out and moving in with Semena, your girlfriend, marrying her and living with her for these 2 years. But you have to be out. This is important, deadly important. Because that's what a name means, life, and being misused, dead naming, death. It didn't used to be like this, but the world crumbles further and further daily. And the force of human will and a deteriorating social consciousness alters the laws and fabric of things till the figurative becomes literal. That's what the Babalawo you met on the shadow web had said. But he also promised a solution. The world spins in cycles of harm and recovery. And one of recovery came if we were astute enough to harness it. There are those who fight, and with the right spells, the readiness to make the right sacrifice, a new cycle could be ushered in. And the Babalawo promised you a solution. It is finally time for the world to meet a reckoning. For all those who had been lost to the wave of dead naming that followed the government outlawing name change, gender change, and sex change, following the repealing of Roe versus Wade, the cascade that started this cycle. You remember Bukohu, another MFA student, now also a dropout. They weren't as lucky as you to find someone who saw them as they were. For you, it was a daily battle. The world shuttered your true self and beat it to mush daily. And when you got back home, Semina replenished it to the extent she could. She was true, but her versus a world that sought to wither who you were was barely enough to keep you in you. On and on it was for you, a constant struggle of being. But Obugowo hadn't been so lucky to find someone who put in them as the world took from them. The force of being maimed with language, misnamed and dead named, as immigrant trans folks had caused themselves to crumble bit by bit till there was not enough left of who they were before to sustain them. They had forgotten who they were, why they were. Now they lived on the edge of life, street begging, asking just to survive, to keep the shell of their body alive, with the soul of their being sucked into the living vortex of human unconcern, by language weaponized to effect a stripping of the self from those like you. Remembering made you forget. The time travel of recall trauma causes you to stumble. You start to forget yourself, to internalize the misnaming and dead naming you had faced. You were Akpojoto, Akpo, she, her, Zigzem. Akpo, my baby girl, you whispered to yourself in the way that Seminar did. Imagine her whispering it lovingly to you as you moaned into her lips. Your steps firmed and you continued on to catch the train to the Babalaos. Next person, the attendant, looked at their screen and asked, your name? Akpojoto, you answer. Do they roll their eyes? They stretch their hand for your ID. You hand them your passport. They glance at it and their eyes run through you, taking in your beard, full chest, and skirts. They sniff and their lips call as they say, Chidiebere Ojada, badly mangling Chidiebere. You flinch. Why did you say Akpojoto? Your name is Chidi, whatever. You diminish with the dismissal of your legal name. Hesitate and explain, pronouncing your name fully. Chidiebere Ojada is my legal name. I go by Akpojoto now. It's non-binary, unisex. I prefer it. I didn't ask you for your confused history. I asked for your name and you gave me a wrong one. Are you trying to impersonate someone else? No, I'm trying to be myself even more. You asked for my name, not my legal name. They eye you up and down, they whisper something you don't catch under their breath. You deflate further, despite being glad that hearing loss from your perforated eardrums had prevented you from hearing. They toss the passport at you. You may go, Akpo, whatever. You shuffle on. You should be going to find your seat, but you are fuming. It's always the combination that does it. You can weather the misnaming of your legal name or the dead naming when they are done alone, but you cannot stand being dead named and misnamed with deliberate malice and the ensuring dismissal of who you were. Your anger gives way to grief at the loss of the pieces of you they had scattered in that dastardly deed. You stand silent, it starts to rain. You stand in the rain, it falls on you, washing away the vestiges of you had held on to. Why are you here? Where were you supposed to go? You can't remember. You had an important mission, but you can only faintly remember one place you want to be, need to be, home. A person who is a place where the rest of you lies. To lie beside, inside someone who holds them for you, who holds you in them. You start to shuffle woodenly in the rain. The jacket falls off you. You don't care. Only one thing matters, the way back to who you were. Without it, all is lost. You are not you without you. They who see and acknowledge you. You start to whisper her name, Seminar, Seminar. You reach blindly for her name, gliding your fingers through it. You find another name lying next to it, yours, Akpojoto. Your fingers caress it, you hold it lovingly, kiss it and taste it on your tongue. Call it tentatively, Akpojoto. The cold is beating you now, biting and sharp. You almost can't breathe, but you don't care. You have found you again. You keep whispering it, Akpojoto, Akpojoto. Cold air blows out of your mouth with the name. It forms a line only you can see, stretching outwards, leading you on, and charting a path, a course to a place and person that can name the rest of you. You follow it. You can't feel your body anymore. It's so cold. You stumble and almost fall, but hold on to the name. It keeps you upright, steadies you. Seminar, Akpojoto, seminar, Akpojoto. You keep whispering, unwilling to let you go. If you die here, you at least die as you, even if they would dare name your dead body, desecrating the very memory and essence of you. But you will live as you. You whisper it as you are close to blacking out. A car pulls over in front of you. It's your neighbor. They call your name, your true name, Akpojoto. Firmly and slowly, they get it in syllabic form, if not in inflection. Their sincerity is strong, carries to you. You don't black out. They open the door and help you up. You stumble into the backseat, starting to find yourself. They drive you home as you struggle to recover yourself and from the cold. They walk with you to the door and ring the bell. Semina is back from work. She opens the door. The neighbor is explaining, I found Z outside. They both share a look. Semina takes you into her arms, thanks the neighbor, and the neighbor leaves. Inside, she turns the portable heater on and gives you tea with lime and ginger in it. After drinking, she has you sit in front of the heaters. She strips you, her hand running through your skin. That's my girl, she says, cooing to you. She rubs oil on your skin, massaging the cold from you, cooing your name over and over. Akpojoto, my baby girl. She strips as well and beckons to you to take her. You mount her and she takes you full inside her. That's my girl, she says, watching your eyes roll back. You breathe her name. She kisses yours into your mouth. You start to come together with the knowledge of who you are and the rightness of being as you are meant to be, as you choose to be. You both start to move simultaneously in a cadence, a chosen dance of truth. You moan deeply while deep inside her. She throws her head back, scratches you while moaning your true name over and over as you gallop into her. Blood runs from your back, the flakes of you being dead named along with it. The heat of her love, the fire in her voice, searing you, firming you. The pieces of you in the name she moans, rushing into the doorways in your skin her fingernails had made. Your true name, from her moans, crawling through the living mosaic, the tender, broken, beautiful fabric of your skin, through the cracks she created, pouring into you, through dried blood and broken skin, the true, pure essence of you, spoken as you choose, ask. She's running her arms over you, feeling you, and loud with the pleasure of it. You reach the crescendo, crash through it, and fall back to the earth as yourself, whole again. Yeah.
Thank you, Oghenechovwe. That was beautiful. I really, the line from the very beginning where you said the world spins in cycles of harm and recovery feels like such an accurate description of where we are right now. Really appreciate that. Our next reader is going to be Lizbeth White. Take it away, Lizbeth.
Wow, I feel a little charged up. This is so good. Everybody's so good. I feel pretty honored to be reading here. Appreciate it. I'm going to read a little bit from Poetry is Spellcasting, which is an anthology of poems, essays, and prompts for manifesting liberation and reclaiming power, which I think is self-explanatory. And then I'll end with a poem from American Sycamore. I'm just going to read a little bit of my essay in this book, which is about enchantment, which might have started mostly as like a way to justify all my daydreaming, but I think we got somewhere good with it. And this is kind of the end of the essay. One of the first entries into the practice of magic is the relearning of enchantment. But why be enchanted? Why lend oneself to a way of being that insinuates surrender or being caught up beyond our control? In many versions of the tarot, the card that opens the deck, and thus the spiritual journey of transformation, is the Fool. The Fool is often portrayed with childlike innocence, so captivated by something in their surroundings they may walk right off of a cliff. Yet it is this the very quality of enchanted attention that moves the fool toward the cliff, the edge of what is known, and into a new beyond. The fool is also sometimes referred to as the universe's favorite child, which is a title I love. The power is unseen delight in the delight of the fool, and so all tools required for the journey to transformation are gifted with generosity and grace. This is not a way of being that caste and capitalist cultures tolerate, relying instead on domination, prescription, and exploitation to achieve one's desires. Systems of oppression operate most functionally in what witch and writer Lisa Fazio coins predictability supremacy, which can be conceived of as a tight space of a closed system, rigid and patterned ways of thinking, feeling, and expressing, in which any perceived deviance is severely punished. For me, this is exactly the motivation I need to allow myself to come again into an attentiveness that is earnest and generous. My enchantment, my re-enchantment with the world as a whole becomes my very resistance against isolation, exploitation, and alienation. True transformation, true power does not exist in a vacuum, but in a space with many other energies, many other beings, many other knowings. Or else there is no material, physical or psychic, to transform. The relearning of enchantment activates expansion as we must stretch the container of our perception beyond what is physically and materially known. We must be open to awe. This is how we enter the transformative arts. If poetic obsession is held as a practice of enchantment, there is spell work that arises. While enchanted, the poem becomes a vessel, energy summoned and held in the container of line. If the work of healing is held with the practice of enchantment, there is a potential for recovery of loss, whether that loss is of power, connection to the soul, or a type of innocence. While enchanted, when I write about even the most tender suffering and ache of the world, the writing itself becomes an application of love in the form of deep attention and care that touches the page. If the work of social and spiritual justice is held with a practice of enchantment, there opens a portal for all ways of beingness and knowingness to be present, to engage, to be witnessed. While enchanted, even the slow alchemy of revolution might be graced with something that could resemble play and feel even a bit like delight. And then I go off about some owls that I was enchanted with, but you can look for the book and read about the owls. And then I just want to read one poem from American Sycamore, which is a recent book with Perugia, who I share with press title with Diane. And this book was actually very much a practice in engaging other and being enchanted. Honestly, it was like a practice of engaging other ways of knowing, most prominently ancestral ways of knowing and land-based ways of knowing. And this is the poem that ends the book, which is one of my favorites because it's kind of a blessing, I consider it. The title of this poem is called Residence Time, which is the amount of time that matter stays itself in any given environment. And the residence time for the oceans is 3,000 to 4,000 years, which means that when we're entering the ocean, we're like very literally touching whatever has been in the ocean for millennia, right? Which for me had implications as a descendant of the transatlantic slave trade. So I'll hear about that a little bit. Residence Time, Barbados, written in Barbados, 2017. Not volcanic, but layered sediment pushed this island to emergence. In the heart of it, 3,200 meters below the cane green top crest, stalactites and stalagmites drip and stack toward each other, closing distance at 1 millimeter per year. My poet friend Joelle wonders what this means about love. The north side cliffs are pocked with holes gaping out to the Atlantic's rough blue. Pools 8 or 9 or 12 feet deep host animal flowers and ghost crabs. blind because who needs sight where no light enters, where it can be felt beneath skirting feet? The geologies of all the dead deposited to make land for the living. I don't mean to bring up death so quickly, but already it has been millennia. Scales, bone, cartilage, ground fine by persistent tides, crushed to become shoreline and peak. Grandfathers were sorted in this first port. Grandmothers dust the seafloor. Here is what they made for us, Joelle. An island of chambers, not violently erupted, but held by the offerings of the body. Collection of cavernous pockets in which we can slip toward each other like tears, see each other coming from 1,000 years away, to create beneath the din a cathedral. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisbeth, for those beautiful poems. I really love this idea of enchantment as resistance, as healing, as transformation, as justice. I just felt like we kept getting a kaleidoscopic view of how enchantment offers us a way into all of these different things that we're so desperately in need of right now. So that was beautiful. Our next writer is going to be Kelly Link.
Hi, y'all. I am very happy to be here with everybody. I am going to read from the opening of a story called The White Cat's Divorce from my collection, White Cat, Black Dog. All stories about divorce must begin some other place, and so let us begin with a man so very rich he might reach out and have almost anything he desired, as well as many things that he did not. He had so many houses, even his accountants could not keep track of them all. He had private planes and newspapers and politicians who saw to it that his wishes became laws. He had orchards, islands, baseball teams, and even a team of entomologists whose mandate was to find new species of beetles to be given variations on the rich man's name. For if it was true that God loved beetles, was it not true he loved the rich man even more? Was his good fortune not the proof of this? The rich man had all of this and more than I have space to write. Anything you have ever possessed, know that he had this too. And if he did not, he could have paid you whatever your price was in order to obtain it. All men desire to be rich. No man desires to grow old. To stave off old age, the rich man paid for personal trainers and knee replacements and cosmetic procedures that meant he always had a somewhat wide-eyed look, as if he were not a man in his 70s at all, but rather still an infant who found his life a cascade of marvelous and surprising events. The rich man had follicular unit transplantation and special creams to bleach age spots. For dinner, his personal chefs served him fish and berries and walnuts, as if he were a bear and not a rich man at all. Every morning he swam 2 miles in a lake that was kept by an ingenious mechanism at a comfortable temperature for him throughout the year. In the afternoons, he had blood transfusions from adolescent donors, these transfusions being a condition of the scholarships to various universities that the rich man funded. In the evenings, he threw lavish parties, surrounding himself with people who were young and beautiful. As he grew older, his wives grew younger, and in this way, for a time, the rich man was able to persuade himself that he too was still young and might remain so forever. But although a man may acquire younger and ever more beautiful wives who will maintain the pretense that he too is still untouched by age, this rich man had a long time ago been married to a first wife, and this first wife had had 3 sons. The 3 sons, having been raised with every advantage by caregivers and tutors and therapists and life coaches paid to adhere to the best principles of child rearing, were attractive, personable, and in every way the kind of children that a father could have regarded with satisfaction. And yet the rich man did not regard them with satisfaction. Instead, when he looked at his 3 sons, the youngest of whom was now 19, he saw only the proof of his own mortality. It is difficult to remain young when one's children selfishly insist upon growing older. To make matters worse, his sons were all in residence at a house where the rich man was spending the winter. The eldest was in the middle of an acrimonious divorce, and the second was hiding out from the media, while the third son had no good reason at all, except that he truly loved his father and wished for his approval. Everywhere the rich man turned, a son was underfoot. At night, he began to be visited by a certain dream. In this dream, the rich man was troubled first by the notion that he had a fourth child. And in the dream, no sooner had he had this notion than he became aware in the morning that this fourth child too was a guest in the house. And although in the morning the rich man found he could never remember what this child looked like, was it small or tall? Was it long and slender or so enormous it blotted out its surroundings? What was the sound of its voice? He knew that this last child was Death. In the dream, the rich man offered his child Death all he had in return for more life, but nothing the rich man had to offer was of interest to Death. The only thing Death desired was the company of its father. Sometimes the rich man had this dream 3 or 4 times in one night. By day, he began to detest the sight of his sons. At last, in perplexity, the rich man turned to consultants to assist him with the problem of his sons. And by the end of the week, a most elegant plan had been put in place. The rich man, in accordance, summoned his 3 sons to his side. Once he had embraced them lovingly, and they had discussed the news of the day and the foundations and boards of which his sons were nominally the heads. He said, "My sons, although it is true that I am in my prime, and although I know it pains you to contemplate, a day must come when I retire into private life and take up a hobby like growing orchids or hunting the most dangerous game or sending unmanned vessels into the sun to see what happens. And although it is farther off still, yet it is ever drawing nearer, a day in which an expert team will cryogenically freeze my body, as well as the body of my current wife, until such a time when medical advances can resurrect me into some unknown hellish future." His sons exchanged looks with each other, and the youngest said, "Dear father, it seems impossible to us that you will ever be any less vital than you are at this moment." The rich man said, "Nevertheless, a time must come when all things change, and when I think of the future, there are 2 things I desire above all else. One is to name my heir. My second desire is for a companion to be a comfort to me in the years of my decline." The oldest son said, "Pardon me, father, but are you telling us that you are to marry again?" The rich man said, No, what I wish for is simply a dog. The smallest, silkiest, most obedient and amiable dog a man has ever possessed. I have decided to task you, my sons, with this errand. You'll have a year and a day to scour the earth for such a dog, and at the end of that span, whichever of you procures it, I shall leave you everything that I own. "But father," the second son said, "dogs make you sneeze, which is why we were never allowed to have them as pets." "The most amiable and hypoallergenic dog," the rich man said firmly. For the consultants had pointed out that if the rich man's sons were sent far from his presence, it might seem as if they had never been born at all. Once the rich man had ruled out filicide, being possessed of a tender heart, the consultants had devised a quest, a kind of beta experiment to see if the rich man's quality of life was improved with no sons underfoot. The rich man's 3 sons agreed in the end to do as their father asked. The oldest said, "Our father has accumulated so much money that even if he must name one of us his successor, the other 2 will never want for anything." The middle son said, "Possibly our father is suffering from dementia, but at least his request, though bizarre, is harmless." And the youngest said, "It isn't as if I have anything better to do." The sons bid each other goodbye, agreeing that whichever one brought home the most charming dog, the other 2 would be good sports about the whole thing. And then it continues from there like a fairy tale.
Well, thank you, Kelly. That definitely had a very fairy tale feeling and also was really funny. There were just so many moments where it took unexpected turns. Blood transfusions from adolescent children, that students really felt very unexpected and also funny and also dark all at the same time. So I would love to read the end of that. Thank you so much. All right. Our last reader for this evening is James Tate Hill. Take it away, JT.
Thank you, Nima, and thank you for letting me be a part of this lineup. I'm really honored to be with everybody. So I read with my ears, so I'm going to abandon my earbud that is in my ear from Zoom, and I'm going to read a chapter. It's just actually an excerpt of a chapter from Blind Man's Bluff that is actually about my discovery of audiobooks after I lost my sight in 1993. And I give you the year because this was the era of books on cassette instead of what we now call audiobooks. So, and this is from Blind Man's Bluff, the chapter called Real Books. Listening to my first book on tape, a vague picture of the narrator popped into my head, the way one imagines the faces of people who are on the phone or radio. He sounded slender, perhaps a man in his late 40s with thinning hair that has begun to gray. It's not as hard as you'd think to guess someone's appearance from their voice, inflection, and the personality that peeks around the corners of words. Minutes into the book, however, I was no longer picturing the narrator. Not long into the first story, the author's words became louder than the voice reading them. On my way out of the library for the blind that first day, brainstorming other books I might check out, I had remembered enjoying the short story To Build a Fire in 8th grade, the only thing in a textbook I ever read by choice. Now I was listening to a story called Love of Life about a lost man on the verge of starvation in the Alaskan wilderness. In another, an Irish mother, out of stubbornness or resignation, gives each of her sons the same name, which seems to curse them to an early death. You could skip stories by fast forwarding until the beep, but I never did. Within a few days, I had finished the entire book. Days after that, I finished another. Over the years, people have asked if I noticed a difference between books on tape and reading print, and the answer is, I don't know. Sporadic reader that I had been, it's hard to say if the words I read with my ears reached my brain differently from everything I read with my eyes. For every study that shows comparably complex brain activity during both methods of reading, there's a respected author or literary critic who discredits audiobooks as more akin to watching television. Given my own seamless transition from watching TV with my ears to reading talking books, I'm in no position to refute such comparisons. What I know for sure is this: sooner or later, the voice in my ear ceases to be a voice. It becomes the words. The words become sentences, and the sentences become the story. At some point, the voice in my ears merges with my own voice, the way words on a page once became my own inner voice when I still read print. This happens less consciously when listening to professional narrators. Other times, with the less polished volunteers who recorded my textbooks, or years later, the digital voice of screen reading software, the translation to an inner voice requires some effort. In an unexpected development, perhaps the first pleasant alteration to my lifestyle in the wake of my first failed eye exam, I became a reader. Me. Books. One after another. In school, the kids who read books not assigned by an English teacher were what we called nerds. My friends and I were also nerds for collecting comic books, for never having girlfriends or weekend plans, but a handful of kids still stood out for seeming to live in their own world, tucked into a corner of the library with noses buried in an Isaac Asimov paperback. One guy in my homeroom read while he walked, bumping into people like some caricature of a misfit from a John Hughes movie. It wasn't fear of nerddom that kept me from reading during school hours. Even if I stowed the bulky cassette player in my backpack, there was no hiding my earphones. Not that there was anything wrong with earphones, but if someone asked what I was listening to, my answer would lead to another question, and another one after that. I hadn't intended my low vision to be a secret until I noticed the way some people, the ones who knew, now regarded me. Aside from my two best friends, people seemed to speak only to those around me. Thus, I did my reading at home after school, usually with the lights off and the TV on mute. My new reading life extended to my textbooks. For years, I had done little more than skim assigned chapters, but staying on top of the reading for my classes meant one less thing I had to fake. As a result, most of my grades improved. But was I actually reading? I regarded myself as a reader, but were these really books? Many years before I would think of myself as a writer, I was aware of the stigma associated with books on tape. Jokes on sitcoms implied audiobooks were to physical books what flag football is to the NFL. To read is to analyze, to study, to process information. And yet a tiny lump in the shape of a lie surfaced each time I used this verb to refer to titles I checked out from my specialized library. Throughout college, after declaring an English major, I would clarify to friends that narrators of my audiobooks didn't perform what they read, as though a straightforward narration had more integrity, a closer relationship to the hardcovers sold in bookstores. There is nothing quite like the scent of a book. The aroma of old paper when you enter a library is the smell of thought itself, of memory and time. For years, I would buy used books I could display on a shelf because being an English major and aspiring writer who didn't own books made me feel like more of an imposter than I already did. Occasionally, I loaned them to people, letting the recipient assume that this copy I was giving them, this paperback or hardcover and not the 4-track cassettes and the green plastic container, was the one I had read. Occasionally, when no one was around, I would pull a book from the shelf and turn the pages. Even without a magnifier, my eyes can tell where the text lies, locate the little black wings on the otherwise blank page that must be the dedication. A few times I would hold the hardcover in my hand while the cassette played, guessing when to turn the page. I feared I might be missing some element of the reading experience, that I might never have been reading at all. I worried that the short stories I wrote were not organic, authentic creations because all the books that inspired and educated me were consumed through secondary media, replications of the original text. A scholar of the humanities might point out the Homeric tradition of oral storytellers, noting that once upon a time, writing and publishing didn't even exist. A few times I tried to write such an essay, defending the way I read by describing the different languages of the world, the unique alphabets with their own characters, incomprehensible to other cultures. But there is no defense quite like the feeling that you have nothing to defend. If the distinction between reading and listening didn't matter in the days of Homer, it mattered each time my freshman philosophy professor failed to remember our conversation about my eyes on the first day of class, when he continued to call on me to read aloud a passage of Sartre or Descartes, and I had to announce my disability to a room of 25 college students I didn't know. It mattered in my dorm rooms when I stowed the white boxes of my recorded textbooks under my bed, stamped in black ink with recordings for the blind and free matter for the blind. It mattered when, encountering Descartes in another class, the renowned philosopher declared sight the noblest and most comprehensive of the 5 senses. Alone in my bedroom at age 16, popping tape after tape into my talking book player, it didn't matter if I was reading or listening. The book titles on the side of the green cartons were the same as the copies found on the shelves of bookstores and regular libraries. They were the same authors. The words in my ears were the same words others saw when they held a book in their hands.
Thank you so much for that, JT. That was beautiful. I love the moment where you talked about how the voice in your ear ceases to be another person's voice and actually becomes your own. And I think the way in which this piece pushes on narrow definitions of what it means to read or what it means to be a writer is so, so important. I'm really grateful to you for sharing that. So we have time for a few questions. I'm maybe going to ask just 2 and then also leave some room for audience questions. but wanted to just start with a question about the fact, I mean, this event is titled Voices of Resistance. It's really, I think, about the fact that we are in a moment where writers have to think about their identities in relation to resistance. We're seeing unprecedented numbers of book bans. We're seeing an assault on the rights of women and trans folks. We're seeing increasing restrictions on our freedom of expression and ideas. And I guess a question I have for all of us to think about is, as a writer, how do you view your role in relation to this moment? What do you feel like is your individual responsibility in this moment as a writer? And also, what do you see as our collective responsibilities in how we respond to the moment that we're in?
Sorry, is that for me?
It can be it's open. You're welcome to respond to it, but it's sort of open to anyone.
Sorry, can you say the question again?
Sure. We're in a pretty unprecedented moment in terms of our lifetimes when it comes to sort of book banning and an assault on the rights of women and trans people. A lot of folks writing, even in what they share today, sort of lifts up some of the questions that we're really grappling with right now. And my question is, how do you understand your role as a writer in this moment relative to what I would call fascist efforts to restrict our freedom of expression, our freedom of thought, our freedom to share ideas? And how do you see that individually for yourself, but also what do you think our responsibilities are collectively?
Oh, yeah. I think that this is a very important question that touches on the function of art and the importance of art. I think the function and the importance of art, while open to choice, people often emphasize the choice. Like it's a choice, what you decide to do with your art, what its function should be. But I'm going to be so bold, so blunt as to say that choice, it being a choice, is a privilege that depends on where you stand and how much apathy you have. For example, you don't need to use your hands to defend yourself or learn to punch. That's not a compulsory thing in life. But if you're being attacked, if your life is in danger, you're threatened, and you want to continue living, is it really a choice what you do with your hands in that moment? Your hands have to defend you, right? Compulsorily, if you want to stay in the world. So it's kind of when that place as artists, we all have a choice what to do with our arts. That's on the standard day. But in this moment and place in time, we are in danger, certain of us in certain positions. So it's not a choice when you look at it from that perspective, what we do with our art. For me personally, I'll say it's compulsory. Art has many purposes, and I like all those things to entertain, to amuse, but I must also compulsorily try to use my art to keep myself and people like me. So, I would also try to entertain. I would try to show aesthetics and beauty while also using my art to protect and defend myself and people like me compulsorily. So, that's my take on that. Okay. Yeah, I wasn't muted.
No, thanks. Anybody else want to take a crack at that question? Diane, I see you. I think you're on mute.
How about now? Okay. It's a very complex question. As a writer, sometimes I feel like my friend who took singing, Georgella, who took singing lessons for a long time, had a teacher once who told her, you have to sing with the voice you have, not the voice you want. And so I think a writer always has to be free to choose their primary loyalties and to put their work in service of whatever those are. What Lisbeth was saying about enchantment really felt very basic to me. Although, for most people, if you say which of these things belong together, and you had the social justice things and you had enchantment, that would be the one that you would stick out. But there are many ways of knowing that are ancient and wise and rich and waiting to be tapped into again in moments just like these, when everything is changing and many people are changing and we don't have models for it. And so for me as a writer, one of the things that I'm really interested in, like Kelly's piece too, is fairy tales as just as one manifestation, one way into those different ways of knowing that maybe we need to turn to right now, just as deeply human patterns at a time when we really need to find ways to help ourselves. That's all I think.
I will say very quickly, my dad was a preacher at one point, and so I always think when I think of the work that I do, each according to their gift. Like you were saying, that there's the work that you, for want of a better word, feel called to do. And I think aside from that I feel the need to remain open to delight, even in dark times, and to not give in to despair. And that regardless of the kind of writing work that I do, that there are other parts of my life. And so one of those parts is I have a very small independent bookstore. My husband and I have for many years have written a press. And so the work that I do may not always be radical in ways that I would like it to be, but we can publish writers, we can showcase other presses, other writers' work in our bookstore, and make that bookstore a place that is inviting to everyone, and that is as radical and as inclusive and as open as we could imagine it to be.
I think I can somewhat, I mean, this is going to repeat a bit what's already been said. But I keep, as with your question, Nima, I keep thinking about like how necessary writing felt for me when I was, I mean, my whole life, but especially when I was growing up, because it was the place where I could actually use my voice, like Diana's talking about. Being, living in this culture where we're so conditioned, and I'm thinking, my writing actually really picked up again after 2016 because of what I was hearing and what I was ingesting, and it felt so important for me to like keep speaking, and as a way of like reestablishing my humanity to the world, but also to myself, and I think that's my personal journey with writing, that's what it does for me. And then when I think about it in a collective or community sense, I find myself coming back to this, just wanting to support people and using that voice in whatever way it shows up, this thing about choice and necessity, and the arts and how we get to tell our stories and how important it is, just to have all these different voices of humanity coming out and supporting people in the incredible gifts that the creative process actually gives us, whether we consider ourselves artists or writers or not, right? That there is something about the kind of attention that it takes to create, to generate, to find something really authentic, to get close to your soul again. Like these are all just the practice, a creative practice amplifies all of those things. And I do actually think that, the more creative we allow ourselves to be, the more change and transformation is possible. Like it does feel, creativity in and of itself feels like very revolutionary to me.
I guess I'm the only one who hasn't responded, and I don't have much to say beyond what brilliant thoughts everyone else has shared, but I will sort of echo what Kelly is saying is not every narrative is going to be transgressive or representative in some way. And I think we have to, I don't know, I hope I don't always have to write a disability narrative, but the flip side of that is that, and Alexander Chee has written about this, is how do you know if you're writing about a group that is not your own lived experiences, how do you know if that's the right decision? And I think whether it's us or whether it's any author, I think it's really crucial for us to interrogate why we're trying to tell this story. Is this our story to tell? Because it's not always our story to tell. And if we're trying to represent another lived experience, is the motivation behind that make it a necessary story? Or should we cede the floor or the microphone to people who are more equipped and or talented or skilled to tell that story?
Thank you all. I really appreciate those responses and the way you're all coming at this in such different ways. Because I think that's part of it, is that there's not one way. There are many, many different ways that we're going to approach this in different points. I'm going to just ask one more question, and it's going to kind of be connected to Lizbeth's enchantment as resistance question, because I do think actually that delight is a form of resistance, right? That joy is a form of resistance, that actually in many ways, that's the thing that people are trying to kill in us. Because when you don't have delight and when you don't feel joy, you don't have hope. And when you don't have hope, you're not going to fight back, right? And so I guess my question for you would be, what's something that's giving you delight right now? What is something that you sort of feel like is something you're enchanted by? And it could be literary, but it could also be kind of fair game. Yeah, don't know if anything comes up for folks, but that is a thing I'd love to hear.
When the pandemic started, I have always been a quilter, and I suddenly felt a tremendous urge to use everything I had in my basement, which is a lot, to make only useful things. I mean, I made masks. I did masks like that, but something in that part of my life shifted that way. So I felt and I think it's also a function of getting older. I'm 65 now, so I'm officially older. But a tremendous need to feel useful and cheerful. Cheerful and useful became my words. And so I can't stop buying fabric. And I delight in it. I love it. I pet it as I go by. And it's a kind of physical, tactile, everything. It gets me out of my head. That's my delight.
Diane, that reminds me, my mother was a sewer, and I just remember being, I'm not, but she used to take me to the fabric store, and we would be in there for hours because she was doing that petting, stroking thing.
It takes hours, it really does.
Yes. Now I have a new, that was her and her joy. I have a new appreciation for being stranded in there. One thing that's bringing me joy is that I've surrendered to the fact that I am not a good gardener. I also come from a line of gardeners, and so I had a lot of shame about the fact that my garden is like, it's not, I can't pay attention to it in certain ways that you're supposed to. But I surrendered this like ideal of being a gardener, and just kind of, I call it chaos gardening now. I've just been kind of letting things grow, and so it's been really fun to see, like, well, I don't know if that's a weed or not, I gotta leave it for a little bit. Oh, it's calendula, great, that's exciting. Or, oh, those are nettles, I should not let those be in here, I should have picked this sooner. But I think it's mostly that kind of surrendering to this, I don't have to be good at everything, that's been really joyful for me.
I'll go. We got chickens in the first summer of the pandemic, and every evening, usually around 7:15, we let them out to free range, and so I sit out with them because there are a lot of predators, and then escort them back to the coop where they go to sleep. And it's pretty delightful to sit and watch chickens. They are like little detectives. They're very busy. They find tons of stuff. They talk to themselves. And that is great. And I will quickly mention 3 books this year that have brought me a great deal of delight. Elizabeth McCracken's The Hero of This Book, a novel with autobiographical elements, very short. Mariana Enriquez's Our Share of Night, which is a horror novel. And horror has brought me a great deal of delight over the last couple of years. And then Megan Giddings' The Woman That Could Fly, which I have read twice now, and I absolutely love. Very timely book, really interesting magic. I think it will be coming out in paperback soon. Highly recommend it.
I will echo books, and I will say the pandemic let me let go once and for all of anything related to guilt, related to reading. And I always have tried to make space for rereading, but it seems like, so much, especially if you're writing fiction and nonfiction, you're trying to keep up with new books, and there's joy in that, but there's also sometimes stress in that. And so setting aside time to reread without any worry that I'm, no fear of missing out on the new books. But I will say a new book that has given me immense joy is, the old me might have felt guilty for reading so many books about movies instead of just watching the movies and reading other books. But Nick DeSemlian's latest book about movies is called Last Action Heroes, and it's about all the ridiculous Schwarzenegger and Jean-Claude Van Damme and Steven Seagal and Sylvester Stallone movies from the 80s and 90s, and all the wild anecdotes. And it has made running so much easier while reading the audiobook, which is narrated by the great Bronson Pinchot, also of 1980s movie fame.
Any other joy for folks?
I'll plug Miss Benson's Beetle by Rachel Joyce.
Thank you all so much. I think we're about at time. But I just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone for sharing your words here. I feel like there are like 4 different poems or essays that just came out of that joy discussion. The detective chickens and chaos gardening. I mean, these are things that I feel like hopefully will spur all kinds of new writing, because I want to read those pieces. I think there's a lot to them. We've got a yard of shame coming up. I think we might have a whole anthology about guilt. Gardens and guilt apparently is a shared theme for lots of people here. But I really am just appreciative of this space and the fact that you all came and shared your words. And I think that this is part of it, right? Part of the collective part is that we come together and we share our words and we sort of celebrate and delight in one another. And I'm really, really glad that we had the opportunity to do that for a little while tonight. So thank you for being here with us.
And Nima, how do you answer that question about what's bringing you delight?
I live very close to Jamaica Pond, which is a kettle moraine about 5 minutes from my house. And I have a 6-month-old and I take her there every day, and watching the baby ducklings and goslings kind of growing as she's been growing has just been kind of a really lovely thing to marvel at. It's been giving me a lot of joy.
That's lovely. Thank you all. This is a really lovely, and your questions, Nima, were so intriguing, and I love the conversation that all of you were having with each other. So thank you so much for that. Thank you to Forbes for co-hosting, to Molly, and to the committee of people who brought all of you together: Stephen Brewer, Michael Goldman, Marianne Scognamiglio, and Anna Smith, as well as me. So thank you all. We will get a recording of this out to everybody, a link to a recording, and I will send the chat as well. So thank you all. And anyone who's been watching, that will let people unmute, but we are officially over now. So those of you who need to go, please feel free, and thank you so much. Good night.